Today we are going to talk about plagiarism. What is plagiarism and how can you avoid it? I have 12 different tips for you. First, let's define it. Plagiarism is anything you do where you take credit for someone else's work. Anytime you use someone else's work and you don't give them credit, that's plagiarism. Let's talk about some examples. If you take someone else's sentence verbatim, even if it's one sentence, even if it's a half a sentence, and you don't give them credit, that's plagiarism. If you say copy and paste one sentence from, say, a research report, and you paste it onto your paper, and you don't give the author of that research credit, that's plagiarism. If you try to outsmart the system and you take that pasted sentence and you try to take a couple keywords and switch them with synonyms that relatively mean the same thing, it's still plagiarism, right? In order for something to not be plagiarism, it has to 100% be your own authentic words. Another example would be if you have a body of text already that's completely your own words, and then you insert a string of words or even a couple words from someone else and you do not give that author credit, that is still plagiarism. It doesn't matter how small it is or how much you use, even a couple words could be enough to be counted as plagiarism. If it didn't come from your brain, you need to give the author that it did come from credit for that information, for the work that they've done. All right, let's now talk about intentional versus unintentional. A lot of times I find that students do intentionally plagiarize. They run out of time, they're not feeling well, they just want to get their homework done. It's Friday night and they want to go out. It's date night. They don't feel like they adequately know the material and they don't have time to learn the material. They have all kinds of excuses, right? Family, medical. For whatever reason, they don't do the work entirely on their own. That is what I find to be the case most of the time. Occasionally, I do have students that don't adequately know the rules for plagiarism and when you have to give credit to the author, when you can use someone else's words and when you can't. And sometimes it's just completely accidental. Unfortunately, if you are a student in any level, the higher up you go, the higher consequence there is for doing it. It doesn't matter whether it's intentional or unintentional. The consequence is the same. And the more you do it, if you're a repeat offender, the consequence will continue to go up. So, not knowing is not a defense. And if you're one of my legal students, you know, like, a legal defense is saying, yes, I did it, but I have a justifiable excuse. So not knowing is not an excuse. And there is no excuse for not knowing, because anti-plagiarism training is generally taught, or it should be taught like frequently. If not, here you go. Okay, so there are no excuses if you use someone else's ideas, concepts, words, thoughts. If they do not come from here, you have to give that source credit. All right. Avoiding plagiarism is not only for students. No matter what your profession, if you're a student or if you work in an office or a bakery, it does not matter. You can never put your name on someone else's words. You might not have a college or a school that's going to punish you if you do it, but you could be violating copyright laws or other intellectual property rights of the author, right? So we don't want to do that. Always, always, always give credit to the source of the information. Okay, so what happens if you do plagiarize, right? It's always good to know what the consequence will be, whether you do it accidentally or whether you do it intentionally. if you plan to try to do it intentionally, it's always good to know what happens if you get caught. I've found a lot of students that don't take the time. They spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to plagiarize and how to do it without getting caught, and they don't look at the consequence of what actually happens if you get caught. And they look utterly surprised when they get a 0 or fail the midterm or the final, or they get dismissed from class, or they get put on academic probation, or they get expelled. Plagiarism is quite a serious thing, right? Especially in the academic setting when we're teaching you and training you to be professionals. We want you to use your own mind, and it's really critical that you learn to give credit to the work that you're using, right? If it doesn't come from you, give it credit, right? And then later, you'll be in the position where others are citing you for your work. All right, the sixth and last thing for what is plagiarism, we're going to talk about where can you find the regulations for plagiarism, the consequence, and anywhere where it discusses what plagiarism is and how to go about avoiding it. Oftentimes, you'll find it in the Student Code of Conduct. If your school has a handbook, it might be in the handbook also. It will define what it is. The definition is pretty much universal. Sometimes I've seen different schools will list different ways or suggestions to avoid it. Other times they'll say maybe go to academic success or some other program that your school has, and they'll teach you how to avoid it if you don't know. You can also look on your course syllabus, especially if you're a college student. Every college course should have a syllabus, which is the expectation of the course. It's what the professors expect from you. It's what you can expect from the professor. I know the school I work for has a requirement that all the syllabus from each class has to have a plagiarism, the policy on plagiarism. It has to reference back to the original source, and it has to at least reference where the consequences can be found, right? So it should not be hard to find, and it's definitely something that you should know before you get into a class. Different professors have different standards, and sometimes they're upheld a little bit more in different classrooms than in others, in different schools than others. For me, I have a 0 policy. You do not get to do it anytime, not even a first time, without some kind of consequence. So do look for it and just be very careful. And if you're unsure, I'm certain that your teacher will not mind helping you, or maybe looking over your work briefly with you, maybe in an office hour appointment, and just letting you know if something is okay or something is not okay before you turn it in. Before you even do it digitally, like I wouldn't email it to your teacher, maybe just ask for an appointment and sit down and show them and let them assist you before you start sending things digitally, and then you'll eventually forget which parts you have questions about and which parts you don't. So better to do it in person. All right, so those are the 6 things that you need to know about plagiarism in general. So how to avoid plagiarism? I have 6 things for you here as well. First, my first suggestion to every student everywhere is to never, never, never copy and paste. Never copy and paste, whether you're doing it digitally and you're on a website and you want that piece of information, so you copy it and you paste it on your paper. Never do that. Never, for any reason. There is no reason to copy and paste. It is asking for trouble. Never copy and paste. We talked in the first section about what I call bad paraphrasing, right? Where you copy and paste a sentence or a few sentences and you try to just swap out a couple words. That isn't true paraphrasing. Again, it's generally relatively easy to spot, and it's not helpful. It doesn't help you, and again, we don't want to intentionally cheat someone of credit. Okay, so never, 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 never copy and paste, right? That is like rule number 1. That is the golden rule. If you want to avoid plagiarism, Never copy paste. It goes the same even if you're not digitally, like if you're not on a computer, if you're using printed or hard copy paper. If you have like a textbook or an article in front of you, just don't copy it, right? Don't read it word for word and then write it down word for word. Never, 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 right? The golden rule to avoid plagiarism: never, never, never copy and paste. All right, number 2 is to keep an accurate research log. If you're in a research class, it's likely that you'll be required to keep a research log and to turn it in periodically. And this kind of helps your teacher or professor ensure that you're actually finding the sources and that you can cite the sources because you found the sources. Oftentimes it's easier too when the students are citing the sources to kind of hold them accountable to say, we know where your sources are, so please be honest about what you pull from these sources and what you're actually getting from yourself. Okay, so a research log, if you're not required to start and keep an accurate one from your teacher or professor, I do encourage them. And the research log is the only place where it's okay to copy and paste, because your research log will want to have the article name or the research name or the document, whatever the document, or the website, the name of the website or web page, the URL, so you can copy and paste from the browser so that you can navigate back there if you need to re-reference it again. You'll want the author's name, the date of publication. You'll want a lot of information on there, and your research log is a great way to keep everything organized. Again, that is the only place you should be copying and pasting if you do it there, right? You generally may not get a grade on your research log. It is okay to copy and paste there because you are putting the author's name, basically all the information you would need to do a citation, you're putting it in your research log. And you do that so that you can provide a citation at the end, right? So that is completely fine. Here's a big one. As you do your research, as you're reading your sources, I suggest, don't just highlight or underline or box or star or whatever you would, the common methods of annotating your textbook or your printed material to go back to use it for your research log. As you're reading, it's a really good idea to take notes, maybe in the margin or on a separate piece of paper, in your own words. So as you read a paragraph or maybe a section or a subsection, try to put it in your own words and digest that section. And after you've digested it and you're sure you understand it, make notes in the margin or on your separate piece of paper and put the notes in your own words. When things are in your own words, you don't have to worry about plagiarism, right? As far as taking words verbatim, they're in your own words. Now, you still do have to cite the source, saying that you got the information in general from whichever source you used, but you won't get in trouble. Most of the plagiarism that comes across, it's verbatim, or it's the bad paraphrasing that I mentioned where the couple words are being swapped out, but there's a big string of text, maybe paragraph or a couple paragraphs where it's very obvious to see. Like, we have software that checks for that. And I generally, when I catch it, I sit my students down and we talk about it. And at the end, I show them the report, and it's obvious to see that the software that checks for it will highlight everything that is verbatim in one color and everything that has obviously been switched in another. So yeah, you're not you're not folding a bus. We've seen this a million times. So be very careful. Be very careful with that. So I do suggest reading, processing, putting notes in your own words in the margin or on a separate piece of paper, and that will avoid everything. Again, don't forget to give the author credit, even if you're not using verbatim words, but just be careful with anything verbatim. Next, number 5. I suggest doing an outline first and never going directly from your original source onto your actual paper that you'll be turning in. That's where students often, if you're going to accidentally do it, that's how it happens generally, is you're copying and pasting, thinking that as you read a source that you want to use in your paper, you copy and you paste big chunks of it, And then you think that later, and like you might copy down the website and the name of the article so that you can later cite it. And a lot of times students are doing this if they don't know how to use a research log, or they're not using one and they should, or they think, okay, well, I'm gonna write my paper without it, and then I'll just go back at the end and like create the log really fast. And by doing it backwards, it's just, again, like it's asking for trouble. But if you don't go directly from the research and copy and paste onto your paper, your likelihood of plagiarizing is just, it's almost zero. So I suggest using an outline as like a medium, right, between the two to keep them separate. Your outline should never be in anything but your own words, right? And there'll be a whole separate video on outlining. So if you'd like to know how to outline, there will be more information there. Okay, so if everything is in your own words all the time, regardless, you have very, very, very little to worry about. There's very little chance that you're going to plagiarize if everything is in your own words. To avoid plagiarism, there's two separate methods to avoid plagiarism. Two methods. First, you can use the everything in your own words method, which is my preferred, right? It's just, there is no risk if everything is in your own words. I can't say that enough. In your own words. In your own words means, again, don't take the exact language of the author and try to switch the order, right? If you have a sentence and then you copy and paste it, but you put the first half of the sentence at the end and put the end at the beginning, that's also obvious to spot, and it's not a good way to do it, right? It's still plagiarism. It's still the author's own words and not your words, no matter what order you put them in. It's not your words. So in your own words means 100% authentically from your own mind. So imagine you were sitting and having a conversation with a friend, and they start off by saying, you will never believe what happened today. They just want to tell you this whole big, crazy, dramatic story. And you're simply listening. You're taking it all in. Whenever they're done, you would say something like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. So what you're saying is, and you would say it back to them. You don't parrot their words back to them. Like, you don't memorize what they're saying as they're saying it and then give them their own words back, right? First, it wouldn't show that you're listening. It doesn't show that you care, that you're engaged in the conversation. What you do is you listen, you process it, and then you give it back to them. You say it in a way that you understand it. It's in your own words, right? So when we do academic writing, it should be the exact same thing. We may not be listening, but if we're reading, right, we read, we process, we flip the original material, whether it's like a paragraph or a subsection, upside down, right? And this is all part of outlining. And you write, you make the note in your own words. In your own words. Okay, so that is method number one, and that's to put everything 100% in your own words, right? If you've read something and you don't know it enough that you have the basic concept by memory, like you can just say it back, you need to read it again. If you feel like you have to copy and paste, if it's not laziness, which it is most of the time, if it's just that you don't understand it, or maybe the document is 10 pages long and you just don't have time to read 10 pages, or it's just a subject that you just don't understand, you have to spend the time to read it or look for a different source. Okay, that is the first way. That is the way that I suggest. The second method is to learn how to properly do a citation. A citation is a way to give credit to the author of the work. A lot of times where students get into trouble is they take language verbatim and they don't put it in quotation marks and they don't cite the source or do a reference to give the author credit. If you're using anything verbatim, even if it's 2 or 3 words, or if it's one very specific word that was maybe coined by the author or something that isn't just a common word and the author uses it, you have to put it in quotation marks. You have to put it in quotation marks. Anything that is verbatim or near verbatim, you have to put it in quotation marks, right? If I say rule number 1 is to put everything in your own words, If you then write that word by word what I say, you have to put it in quotation marks, that portion, put it in quotation marks, right? Quotation marks and a citation is the way to give the author credit, thus avoiding plagiarism. I would note, however, that before you do that, just make sure that your assignment allows citations. I know for a lot of my students in a lot of my classes, I want summaries, and I want to know that the students have read and have spent the time to process the information and that they can summarize it. And a lot of my assignments, I don't allow quotations, mostly because students try to do it correctly and they end up plagiarizing accidentally, because they'll put the quotations and then they'll forget to give credit to the author by doing a citation. So that's plagiarism accidentally. They also might get a little bit lazy with it, and they might put like 3 or 4 lines or a whole paragraph, and instead of attempting to put it in their own words, they'll just stick a quotation mark at the start of the paragraph and at the end of the paragraph. So basically none of the work is their own. They're just copying and pasting chunks, huge paragraphs from different sources, putting quotation mark on everything, citing it, and just calling that their paper. You don't want to do that either. So if you're going to use verbatim words, you want to put a quotation. Ideally, you don't want to put a quotation around the whole sentence unless every single word is vital. Really what you want to do is just pick out the couple words or maybe a small string of words that are really important that you can't say any better than the author, or maybe it's like a direct quote from the author. Then you can put that in quotation marks. At the end of that sentence, or at the end of where you're done using the verbatim language, you want to do an in-text citation. It's also called an inline citation. And depending on which formula you're using for your citations, will depend how you do that. But I will have a couple examples linked in the comment below. But you definitely need to give credit, right? And then generally at the bottom, you're going to want to have a reference section. Once you do keep all of those in mind and hopefully do these 6 things, you are going to avoid plagiarism. It's not going to be a problem, and you will have a very happy, successful semester, plagiarism free.